Doctors who've actually answered the question, is anyone here a doctor? What happened? Guy on a train was drunk and appeared to be in some distress and vomiting. When I got to the car, it was obvious to me that he was not vomiting because he was drunk. He was vomiting coffee ground emesis, an upper GI bleed. He was disoriented, likely for the same reason. The man was definitely not drunk. I turned him over to an ambulance at the next stop, spoke briefly with paramedics and then got back on the train and continued to my mother's town. This was days after I graduated. I had not yet done a residency. Hasn't happened since. Important note in case anyone missed it. If anyone is vomiting and what comes out looks like coffee grounds, it means they are bleeding internally and need to go to the hospital immediately. Was on a flight to London and the call went out at 5:30 am. I went to the back of the plane as directed and I eventually was told to go to the seat of a passenger. When I got to his seat, he was slow to respond to my questions, but he was alert and could tell me where he was and where we were going. Turns out he was a chronic opioid user for pain and uses benzodiazepines like Ativan for anxiety. Well, he is afraid to fly and anticipated that the rush through the airport would cause more pain. So naturally he doubles up on his opioids, plus his Ativan, plus he decides to have a couple of drinks mid-flight. He was basically so drugged up that his seatmates thought he was having a stroke. The stewardesses asked me if I wanted the captain to land the plane, but because he wasn't in any danger and we were about an hour from London, we just carried on and monitored the man. Just a few days ago, though, I walked into a bank and noticed a man lying beside the ATM. There was someone at the other one who was acting like everything was normal. I told the bank attendant and we approached the guy. Turns out he was a chronic alcoholic who hadn't had a drink in a while and was in alcohol withdrawal and had a seizure shortly after arriving. I don't know how long he was lying there or why absolutely nobody made mention that there was a man on the ground with vomit beside him. People were walking past him like it was normal. It's surprising and kinda sad how many people don't know how bad alcohol withdrawals can be, so they don't know that the person is at a serious risk. Not me, but I was volunteering at a race event. A man had just crossed the marathon finish line and went into cardiac arrest. While we were panicking and trying to get emergency services over, literally 2 seconds later, a whole race team of doctors, nurses and such crossed the finish line and saw what was happening. They sprang into action, and the guy ended up getting all the attention he needed and was fine in the end. It could not have been more fortuitous timing. It was almost comical. Not quite the same thing, but I once got stuck in an elevator with 6 elevator engineers. They had the doors open and we were out in less than a minute. I work in imaging, specifically MRI, the big magnet, in a large trauma hospital. While I am BLS and first aid certified, I generally don't jump up unless everybody has that deer in headlights glazed look. I picked up some OT and was driving home after the extra shift. Around 2230, 10:30, I see a truck on its top and a circle of people watching. Yup, deer in headlights. Might wanna make sure whoever in the truck is out. So, park my car, hop out in my scrubs. Some bystander, she's a doctor. Crap, no, not a doctor. Not even carrying gloves for what I'm about to walk over to see. Poor guy is sitting upright against his upside down truck. A nice degloved scalp, black and blood everywhere. Your scalp bleeds forever. A bystander hands me her shirt, and I use that as a makeshift barrier to hold the guy's neck until EMT arrives. Somebody yells for me to stop the bleeding on his scalp. Somebody hands me their belt. Sir, you can't use a belt to stop head bleeding. It's not very nice. Sure you can. You wrap it around his neck in a tourniquet. Okay, that may be overkill. Never mind. Well, the doctor in question is my father, not myself, but we were on a plane coming home from vacationing in Florida when, during the latter third of the flight, a man came stumbling down the aisle and nearly fell down as he passed our row. A few of us started to get up, asking if he was alright, and he quickly got up and darted into the bathroom, but not before we saw that his skin was a horrible ash grey. Dad speculated that he was having some kind of diabetic emergency. Guy disappeared into the bathroom and was in there for a long time, and after a while the most horrific smell began to waft out. A flight attendant eventually went to check on him, opening the door just a crack, the smell filling the whole plane, and was soon joined by more attendants, and after some talking amongst themselves, one asked, "Is anyone on board a doctor?" My father stood up and dutifully went back there, and when he opened the door to go in, we could all see that there was crap all over the door and walls of the bathroom. Turned out the guy had consumed a lot of wine and shrimp cocktails for what would have been breakfast, and obviously something went awry. Anyway, when we finally landed, they wanted to bring the guy out of the bathroom to a waiting EMT before letting the rest of the passengers off. The guy was mortified and refusing to leave the bathroom as long as we were there. The staff in turn said that protocol would not allow healthy passengers to unboard before one with a health emergency. So, that kicked off a half-hour or more sort of standoff where the flight staff tried to convince the man to let them take him off in a wheelchair, during which they turned off the AC and had us all close our windows and stay in our seats. On a sweltering summer afternoon, while the poo stank permeated every inch of the plane, people were starting to gag all the way up front. Basically, Dad finally convinced the flight staff that having all the passengers get sick would be infinitely worse and to let everyone leave, since the poor crap-covered dude was not gonna budge until the coast was clear. There wasn't a whole lot he was able to do for the guy otherwise, but I guess at least he spared a bit of his dignity. Not me but my mother. We were sitting in a high-speed train for 4 hours and reserved some seats for it. I saw the guy sitting opposite to us with a lot of folders, so I assumed he needed to do some paperwork for his job. After 2 hours they stopped the train suddenly and called for a doctor in our part of the train. The guy and my mother stand up in seconds and just look at each other with confusion. He, "What kind of doctor are you?" She, "Cardiologist." He, "Oh thank God, I am a gynecologist. Tell me if it is a birth." It was a metabolism issue. Nothing serious in the end. My son was playing baseball and took a hard grounder to the face. He was bleeding pretty bad, so the coach, another fellow, and I ran onto the field. The fellow said that he was a dentist and asked me if I was a doctor. I said, "Yeah, I have a PhD in physics." He kind of looked at me funny. Then we walked my son off the field. I didn't realize until later that he didn't know that I was the father, and he probably thought I was some smart butt running on the field to offer medical help. Well, physics played a role in the injury, so. Medical student here, whose dad's a doc and mom's a nurse. We've had multiple holidays where this happened. The thing that was the most impressive for me, however, was a holiday where I was 11 or so. We were swimming in an indoor pool. Dad was outside. Mom was with me and my little sister. All of a sudden people start screaming and a 3-year-old toddler is pulled out of the water, blue and not breathing. Mom immediately started the Heimlich, upside down, to get the water out of the lungs, while my sister and I got Dad. By the time we got back, the kid was conscious and crying. Dad took him to the medic's cabin and had to literally convince the guy there to give the kid oxygen. Happy ending though, the kid made it, without any brain damage or fake. We still get a Christmas card every year. But yeah, that was a lot to take in as a kid. In my eyes, my parents will always be heroes for that. How sweet of him her to thank you every year with a card. Cousin's wedding. Family member flew in from South America, had a heart attack and was no pulse. Dentist guest began CPR. Doc guest relieved and ambulance showed up. Pulse was weak, but he was alive. Doc rode to hospital. Wedding reception continued. Family member flew home and was still alive years later. That's amazing. The survival rates of out-of-hospital cardiac arrest are very low. Obligatory not a doctor, but friend's rich family of Canadian hippies took me to a jazz festival in New Orleans. During dinner a drunk guy at another table started choking and Heimlich, by waiter, was ineffective. His dad, a stoned, drunk, sunburned family practitioner, hopped up and delivered some kind of advanced sternum punch and saved the day. Anyway, dinner was free, and a ton of drinks. Advanced sternum punch, that sounds painful lol. Obligatory not a doctor, but I was sat next to one on a plane from Shanghai to Detroit. About 2 hours into the flight, the announcement comes over the PA. The guy next to me sits bolt upright and looks around for a flight attendant. The look in his eyes said he had been waiting for this moment his entire professional life. Once the doctor business had been taken care of, the flight attendant stopped by periodically to give him updates, and lots of free miles. Apparently it was a man in his 20s with a history of seizures that had never been to see a doctor about them. The older flight attendants proceeded to give the young man a stern talking to for the remainder of the flight. I was on a flight recently and a woman started having a seizure in the route ahead of me. I'm not a medical doctor, but when they asked if there was a doctor on board, literally 7 or 8 people came forward at the same time, including the guy sitting next to me. Apparently there was a pediatrics conference that they were all going to. It was a really interesting situation to be in, especially since several of the doctors had different opinions on what to do and the flight attendants were trying to help but also crowd control all the opinions. Mostly because there were some things legally that they couldn't do. The lady having the seizure was fine in the end and they had people ready when we landed to check her out further. My wife responded to this on a flight with a Middle Eastern carrier. A passenger had collapsed on the flight. The crew would not let her see the patient, demanding her doctor's card first. This is not something the UK General Medical Council produces. Eventually, when no other option was available, my wife convinced them she is in fact a doctor and was allowed to check the passenger. He turned out to be diabetic and hypoglycemic, so quickly resolved in a complete anticlimax. No, there was no special treatment for being a doctor or assisting, and the crew didn't even say thank you. I was gonna joke and make a response like this, but here you have the example of the real thing. I don't get it. I graduated med school 13 years ago and over half my class was female. I still occasionally get comments like, I expected a male doctor. My favorite response is they let women be doctors now. Kinda joking with the patient, but also making them realize they are biased. It happened to my sister on a flight when someone passed out. She, an OBGYN, responded as did a radiologist, and a nurse also came up to see if she could help, which my sister appreciated since it had been a long time since medical school. I think it ended up not being serious, but she went back to her seat after assessing that the patient wasn't in labor or in need of a pap smear. The radiologist probably only came to get your sister to stop ordering unnecessary tests. In real life, on a flight, some lady had esophageal syncope, fainted, and I brought her knees close to her body to improve blood flow and the flight attendants gave her water. She felt better and we continued to our destination. On Reddit, I've told a bunch of interesting stories from my time in medical school and occasionally get PM'd pictures of boobs and or Josh Peck. Sending just Josh is only one boob. You clearly asked for boobs, not boob. How rude of those people. Indian mom, is anyone here a doctor? Doctor, yes I'm. Indian mom, will you marry my daughter? WTF lol. Not a doc, but a nurse. Heard loud crash outside the Waffle House I was eating at. Ran outside to see what was up. Kid screaming for doctor. Run up to see what is up and his leg is sticking the wrong way. Immobilize it and stay with him till medics arrive and then go back to my double bacon cheese steak melt. Most nurse thing I've read all day. Flying to an island for a holiday a couple of years ago. The first call was, is there a physiotherapist on the plane, which was predictably followed a couple of minutes later by, is there a doctor? A very nice lady had dislocated her prosthetic hip when the man in the seat in front of her reclined sharply into her and she shuffled to adjust her position. She was in agony. The plane had a fairly decent medical kit, so I was able to get an IV cannula into her and give her some reasonable painkillers. However, there was no chance of me popping the hip back in, and where we were going didn't really have a hospital, so I told the crew they'd have to land somewhere that did. Once she'd got off the plane and been taken to hospital, there was some problem with a sensor or something and we couldn't take off again, so everyone had to stay overnight in this unexpected destination. Other passengers were not best pleased and I could not sink far enough into my seat when this was announced. To add to this, the actual destination, which we reached the next day, was a resort that most of the passengers were going to, so I had to endure strangers calling me doc for the whole week. The lady got her hip sorted and sent me a lovely card once she got home. The flight crew were ace as well and my partner and I got to visit the cockpit on the return flight. It was the same pilot and he remembered me. The person who asked responded with, well, you're a nerd. Years of ASDF movies rushing back into my brain gave me vertigo. Not me, and not a doctor, but my cousin, and a nurse, was on a flight and they made the "is there anyone in the medical field on board" announcement. She responded, and they took her to an elderly passenger who was in some distress, heart palpitations, If I remember correctly, she monitored the lady's vitals and the flight crew was ready to do an emergency detour if my cousin had determined the lady was in danger. She wasn't. As it turns out, the lady was on her way to the same cruise my cousin was headed to. They ran into each other on the boat and the lady bought my cousin a drink. So, a happy ending. I work in a dermatology office in a building full of family doctors, dentists, eye doctors, and physiotherapists. At the staff Christmas party one year, one of the spouses of a doctor had a heart attack. There were enough doctors and nurses present to take care of the issue very promptly, and the outcome was positive. At our dinner table, the dermatologists had all been drinking wine by this point and yelled out, "Well, if anyone gets a rash, let us know." That's such typical doctor humor, lol. Nurse midwife, not a doctor, so whenever there's a doctor on board, call goes out, I'll lay low and hope someone more qualified volunteers. But twice I've admitted I'm a nurse and been drafted to help. Once was on a 10-hour red-eye flight. I'm still shocked that on a packed 747 I'm the best they could come up with. Fortunately it was just a woman having severe gas pains from sitting still too long and wearing Spanx. I told her to take off the Spanx and walk for a while. For my service I was given a little gift bag of snacks and alcohol, which was so nice but kind of embarrassing. Another time was on a city bus and a man had a seizure. The driver stopped right at the corner adjacent to the local medical school. I thought surely there's some overzealous med student on board who wants to take this one. But no. I finally admitted I was a nurse when the poor driver started to look frantic. All I did was sit with the guy until the paramedics arrived and pointed out that his dentures had fallen on the ground. I was the patient in one of these situations. I was umpiring a high-level adult league baseball game. Pitcher was fresh out of playing low D1 and throwing 88-90. Many of the other players were guys that had played either low D1 or high D3 college but now were late 20s. I took a foul tip square off the mask and went down. My partner ran to check on me but one of the players stepped in and said he was doing his residency in neurology. They got me to the dugout and dude gave me as thorough of an exam as is possible in that situation. I stayed in their dugout the rest of the game, then he gave me a lift home after since he recommended I not drive. He confirmed I wasn't in any imminent danger but gave my wife some instructions, and he made a call to get me in the next morning to see a good private practice neurologist he knew. Another story. One of my good friends is the son of a doctor. He would play pickup hoops games every week with his doctor buddies from the hospital, and when they were short they would call us. One time a guy came down funny and blew out everything in his ankle. There in the pickup game was an anesthesiologist, a neurosurgeon, a cardiologist, and an emergency medicine specialist. Pitcher was fresh out of playing low D1 and throwing 88-90. Many of the other players were guys that had played either low D1 or high D3 college but now were late 20s. I took a foul tip square off the mask and went down. There are words there, but to someone who doesn't follow baseball, that means absolutely nothing. Glad you survived to tell the tale though. This was before I was a medic in the army. I just finished my basic first aid education about 2 weeks ago and was at a large student party. The DJ called for a medic and I responded. Somebody tripped on the dance floor and fell into broken bottle shards with both hands. That person was very drunk. I cleaned up his hands and went searching for a first aid kit. I could not find one and when I returned he was gone. I returned to the dance floor just for another call for a medic. Somebody found an unconscious girl stuck between the toilet and cubicle on the ground. For this one we called the professionals. We got her unstuck and stabilized and she woke up. While we carried her to the front door we got called to another knocked out alcoholic in training. We moved both girls to the now arrived ambulance. They treated both, but could only take one of them back to the hospital. Girl number 1, from the cubicle, was doing much better now and had several friends present. She may have vomited most of the alcohol out of her system, so she was allowed to go home under supervision of her friends while the other girl was taken to the hospital. The guy with the bleeding hands never turned up again. Some say he's still out there to this day, bleeding all over everything and stumbling around. Not me, but my grandma used to be a nurse and once again in a plane to Arizona someone's water broke and she was able to deliver the baby. Fun fact, if the mother and father were not American, there is a chance that baby is an American. Depends on some laws but generally, a baby born over a country is a citizen of that country. Obligatory. I'm not the doctor in the situation, but I have a story. My dad and his friends were riding their motorcycles up in Carson, Washington, which is basically bumfuck nowhere. Anyway, as they were riding, my dad's bike caught on something they call a tar snake. On a hot day, I guess motorcycle tires are more likely to get grip in those things, which is what happened in my dad's case. The tire caught on the tar snake and his bike went out from under him. This caused him to roll with his bike and snap his femur, break some ribs, and turn the ball sockets in his shoulder to dust. Luckily for him, there were two people in a car behind them who happened to both be doctors. They pulled over and helped stabilize him until the life flight could get there to help him. I've never met that couple, but I'm glad they were there when my dad had his accident. Tar snakes are those lines of tar that construction companies pour onto cracks in the road that aren't too big yet. As a biker, I freaking hate those things. It's like riding over a glow paper mousetrap. At a wedding I attended, a young girl went into cardiac arrest on the dance floor when a latent heart defect reared its head. Just so happens the groom and several groomsmen were a combination of police officers and EMTs paramedics, and the venue had only recently invested in a need. She was technically dead for several minutes. She is alive and well now due to receiving instantaneous treatment. I was at Catholic Mass and priest does a wobbly sidestep into sacristy. It was a memorial mass for my dad. The whole family turns to me and says, "Do something." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" They go, "You're a doctor. Do something." "I have a PhD." They go, "We all saw you graduate." They said, "You are a doctor." I didn't argue. Priest was dehydrated. In my family I was first to get past high school. Obligatory. Not me, but I was a parent at a soccer game where a keeper got kicked in the face hard during a scrum. Two parents on our team, married to each other, were doctors. They argued about who had to go help because neither of them wanted to. You'd be surprised at how often people who get saved sue the saviors. Not me, but my dad had this happen to him. He was at Eagle's Nest on a tour and a woman tripped and broke her ankle. He stabilized it with a couple of things that they could find so that they could help her get all the way down to go get seen in a hospital. Lady on the beach broke her arm. My dad had recently got his doctorate and excitedly replies yes to, "Is anyone here a doctor?" He's a doctor of philosophy. Help, they are dying. We are all dying. I don't know about anywhere else, but in the UK, any medical doctor must answer that question. If they don't, they may find themselves in trouble. Not really an answer to the question, but just a contribution. My mom's a doctor. Once I was getting the tube with her and we heard over the intercom, "If there is a doctor in the station, can you please come up to group level?" And my mom just takes me and we skedaddled up to the station entrance. Some guy had slipped back going up the escalator and smashed his head open. My mom and some others helped get him off the escalator and onto the main station floor, where my mom started treating him as best she could. An ambulance arrived like 2 minutes later, so my mom didn't get a chance to do much. We then had to go into a pret so my mom could wash the blood off her hands because the underground didn't let her use their staff toilets. It was kinda weird to see her just zoom into action. I would have been so tempted to wipe my hands on their uniforms. Not a doctor, but at my wedding, my DJ asked if there were any paramedics or doctors present. We thought he was joking because my husband and two of our guests worked together for an M system. He was not joking. There was in fact a man in the restaurant portion of the yacht club in cardiac arrest. So, my husband, drunk and in his tux, goes into the restaurant with one of his co-workers. The other co-worker goes to the bar looking for a need. Hubby and first co-worker end up saving this guy, give a full report to the ambulance that pulls up, then come back to the reception and get even more plastered. Second co-worker never did find that need, but she did find more drinks. I was on a 24-hour road rally scavenger hunt, and we got caught in a long traffic backup in the middle of the night on a mountain road that had been obstructed by a severe collision. One of the first vehicles at the accident site was another team in our game comprised of neurosurgery residents. They stabilized the accident victims until the medevac helicopter arrived, then resumed the game. Didn't officially get the formal question, but I had been a doc for about 1 month and my wife and I went camping. Early the next morning, someone from the campsite over was screaming bloody murder, yelling for help. I stumbled out of my tent and ran over to their tent. Her teenage daughter is having a grand mal seizure. violently shaking seizure. I rolled her on her side and told the mom to call 911. Actually had my stethoscope in the car, so listened to the heart and lungs while we waited. She stopped seizing and came around by the time the paramedics arrived. I told them to go to the hospital. New seizures in a teenager is not a great sign. I watched a guy fake a fall in the grocery store, opened a gallon of milk, pour some on the floor and lower himself on top of it. He screamed, "Help me," and started holding his back while laying on his back and doing the snake-like wriggle. Total Oscar-worthy performance. I stood there amazed that he didn't look around to see if anyone was actually watching before pulling this crap. Then I realized the worst. I had just come off shift and was standing there wearing scrubs. Frick me. Everyone around is looking at me like, "Hey butthole, aren't you going to help?" I just loudly exclaim, "I'm a veterinarian. Let me go to the front and call for an ambulance." I slowly take my time, go to the front desk and tell them what I just witnessed and to call an ambulance for the guy to cover themselves. Then, as soon as they're done doing that, review their security tapes and watch what he did. They asked for my name and I pretend my phone just rang and practically ran out, leaving my unpaid groceries right there. No way was I getting mixed up in that fraud scam. Technically now I am a Juris Doctor, but during my undergrad I worked at a golf course in the summers. Golf courses are the perfect mix for heart attacks. Big old dudes have a beer and a burger at the 9, then go walking up hills in the hot sun. So my school job required me to have extra CPR training, and because it was early in the year, all the new golf course staff had not been CPR trained. So when a call went out on the radio for anyone with training, I was one of 3 employees who had it. Guy had collapsed at the bottom of a hill looking for his ball. Me and the sous chef take the defibrillator out and get to work. Maintenance guy meets us out there, as well as a nurse who was playing a group behind. The course was on an island, so it took over 50 minutes to get an ambulance out there, so we did CPR for almost an hour. Guy somehow lived. Not a doctor, but I was a ski patroller in college. I was walking through the ski rental area on my way to the snow. Kid comes up and says his mom is having chest pains right outside the door. I called for backup and followed him over. I got through about 3 words of our standard introduction. Name: I'm with ski patrol. Ask for consent. When she collapsed, I started CPR as my backup arrived. We ended up doing chest compressions for about half an hour and delivered 3 shocks from an ED. She revived in time for the paramedics to arrive and climbed on the stretcher under her own power. Coded twice more in the ambulance. Went straight into surgery when they got to the hospital. She ended up coming to the resort's end of year festivities to thank us for saving her life. We were on vacation at the beach. Suddenly someone rushes into the dining room and shouts, "Help. So and so is dead." So my dad, GP, rushes out to see what is going on. Hotel staff wants to deny him access to the patient. "No sir, go back to your seat." He starts pushing back. "I'm a doctor. Let me check for a pulse." He then is pulled to the side and staff explains, "There was a murder mystery party that weekend." You have been visited by the Wealth Rat. Subscribe in 12 seconds and he will share his wealth with you. Like and subscribe, you magnificent person.